Hello, everyone, students in Age of Sustainable Development and other SDG Academy courses. Thank you for being here with us this morning. I'm excited to introduce Michael Schenk, who is the Head of Communications for the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network in New York City, where he handles communications for Professor Jeffrey Sachs and SDSN's work on the Sustainable Development Goals. So, my name is Alana Selekshina, and I am the Teaching Assistant for the Age of Sustainable Development course. And how it is going to work with this live session today is if you have questions that, for Dr. Schenk, then you can put them in the chat bar, which is to the right of the YouTube video. And in order to do that, you just need a YouTube or Google account. So you can set that up now. If you don't have one, you can just type them into that right bar, and I will pass them along to Dr. Schenk. So just to start, I thought I'd ask a quick question, which is, can you tell us a bit about your role here at the Sustainable Development Solutions Network? What do you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. So good day to everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thrilled to be with you. We're going to have 30 minutes, an hour to talk about how to communicate what we all care about around sustainability, sustainable development, the Sustainable Development Goals. It's not easy, but hopefully after today's conversation, you'll have some tips and techniques to make it a little easier in the effort to communicate sustainable development and the SDGs. So to answer your question, what do I do? So as head of communications, helping Jeff Sachs in his role, he's an incredible communicator, so he doesn't need a lot of help, but helping place his op-eds, his articles, but also getting him on TV to talk about this very work, sustainable development. But also when SDSN has an index that they want to put out on the SDGs, or if they've got a Vatican conference in the coming week, which we do with youth in the SDGs, I'll help with press outreach on that. But today's conversation is less about SDSN and more about you and how you can get involved in communicating this incredible work globally. So I'm going to start with 7 M's that hopefully will be useful to you as you think about communicating sustainability, sustainable development goals, SDGs, you name it. First one is a messenger. Either you're the messenger or someone's the messenger, but we love messengers. We love heroes, we love following people, we love to idolize a messenger. And so imagine you're in campaign mode and either you're the messenger or someone's the messenger, but there's got to be a messenger. We can't hide behind a reporter or publication. There's got to be someone leading on it, someone talking about it. So think of yourself as an evangelist. Doesn't have to be clearly a religious evangelist, but you get the point in terms of pounding the pavement, and you're the messenger. So how can you enhance your capabilities as oral communicator or written communicator so that you can be the messenger for the SDGs? Secondly, message. Now, we tend to, those of us in the weeds on these issues, tend to lead with a message that may or may not always resonate with the public, the mass majority, the middle. And what tends to trend and what tends to be popular with the public, no surprise, is an economic message or a health message. So think about anything you're doing with the SDGs, whether it's poverty, whether it's education, whether it's health, whether it's climate. Think about the economic angle, if you can, or the health angle. How is this going to improve the public's or the individual's personal health, personal income, the community economy, the city health, etc. Other messages that tend to work, security, but in case you don't want to play into the security card or the security angle, think about an economic message or a health message. Those tend to work best with the public. So we've got messenger, we've got message. Secondly, mainstream. In the United States, I love to write for USA Today, the newspaper. Why? Because it is read across America, in Middle America. It ends up on the doorsteps of every Middle American hotel. And so Middle America is reading USA Today and they're watching Fox News. So I want to be on Fox News and I want to be in USA Today. Now, the Wall Street Journals, the New York Times in the United States, they're important. But I think we tend to play to elite audiences or marginal media audiences, and we really need to play to the moderate middle, and in the US, that's USA Today, that's Fox News. Moment, another M, that's our 4th M. So if you just go to googlenews.com, news.google.com, and see what's trending in the news, how can we make our work fit within that moment? that news cycle. Now, granted, we get gifts sometimes, and I'll give an example. A couple weeks ago in Kigali, the world came together around hydrofluorocarbons, which are in our air conditioners and our refrigerants. And so that conversation, for a brief moment, for a couple days, is trending. In fact, in the New York Times, which I'll bring up right here because I read on my train to work, they talk about the HFCs and how it will impact India. So we have a brief window sometimes where the news is trending in our favor. So if I care about climate change, if I care about energy efficiency, if I care about deep decarbonization, language that press won't be using, there are moments in the news cycle where it's going to be easier for me to insert a conversation around the SDGs or sustainability or sustainable development. We have to look for those moments. I would argue that any news cycle is a moment, and we just have to be creative in making it relevant to Trump or to Putin or to what's trending on Twitter. That's up to us to be creative, and it's coming upon us to find a relevant news hook. But again, there are gifts, and Kigali was one gift. Another M, meme. So, as you know, anyone who's on any kind of social media, there are memes happening all the time, and we have to be creative about thinking about a meme. I was just watching in the taxi over this morning, our city council talking about hashtag not a fan, and it was regarding domestic violence. And so hashtag not a fan was what they were encouraging as their meme to talk about domestic violence, and that they're not a fan of domestic violence. And they had some athletes weigh in to say, hey, we too are not a fan, hashtag not a fan. So in any of our work, how are we building memes that are shareable, that are trending, that work well in social media? You have to think about that now these days. Another M is for me. And by me, I mean really walking the talk. And I'll give two examples. Bill Gates, when he wanted to showcase a technology around purification of water, drank water that was formerly filled with and was fecal matter. Forgive the description that may be too visual for some, but it was fecal matter. It had urine, it had waste in it, human waste. It was purified, and then he drank it. Got a lot of press because here's here's Bill Gates putting himself out there for the purposes of press, and he was also a great messenger. But think about how you can use the me in creative moments. Maldives cabinet, as you may recall, when they were wanting to talk about sea level rise, they had a cabinet meeting underwater. So here's Maldives doing a cabinet meeting underwater to talk about sea level rise. That was the ministers putting the me in the messaging, and it worked very well. Lastly, meetups. So in any of your work, it's going to be easier if you've got a relationship with a reporter. Now, some of you may not think of yourselves as experts in communications or media or press, but that's okay. If you see an article that you like in your local paper, in a national paper, in an international paper, whether it's The Guardian, the Financial Times, The Economist, Associated Press, Reuters, but even more local, in your location, local outlet, email that reporter and say, hey, I really love what you wrote. Most of the time, reporters get hate mail from people who didn't love what they wrote. So if you do see something well written and you do love what they wrote, email them. They love that, and that builds a relationship. So you've got a relationship with a reporter. Next time they're covering health, climate, oceans, land, you name it, they might think of you that, oh yeah, I had that conversation with that person at the organization. I should check in with them to see if they know anything about this topic. Because when you email that reporter saying, hey, I love what you wrote, and next time if you're writing on this, please let me know because we've got a bunch of resources. Be of assistance. Be in relationship with that reporter and offer your aid up in terms of your organization's work. So the next time when they're writing, they think of you. So to go over those 7 M's again, in effective messaging and effective movement building, get a good messenger. Hopefully that's you. Hopefully you're willing to step up and be a better, I don't know how good you are at oral and written communication, but increasingly we need to be good communicators and communicating to the lay public. Have a good message. Economic and health messaging often works best, but sometimes security, often environmental, isn't what pulls people's heartstrings, but it is economic and health. Third, mainstream, appeal to the mainstream media and appeal to the mainstream public. That's where the work needs to be done. You'll see in the US context, we might have progress on the books or in law, but a politician who will go unnamed, but who is in the advertisement for this hangout session can roll back some of that progress. And that's why we need to appeal to the mainstream public. So we bring them along. Oftentimes, law moves forward quickly. Progress in legislation might move forward quickly, but unless we brought along the mainstream middle, it will get rolled back pretty quickly by a politician who can do that. Moment, always be on the lookout for moments. They have to seize those moments quickly because they pass quickly. Build out a meme in anything you're doing. The me, be willing to put yourself out there in courageous, creative, surprising press moments. And Bill Gates is a great example of that. And Maldives is a great example of that too. And then lastly, meet up, build a relationship with the reporter and the editor so that they think of you next time. Now, moving past those 7 M's. And if you have any questions throughout this process, please just type it on your right or your left. I'm not sure where it is because I'm happy to answer any of those questions. Most of the time, the press isn't using the language of sustainability. And they're not talking about the Sustainable Development Goals. And they're not talking about sustainable development. So given that, what do? I encourage you not to talk about sustainable development, not to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, and not to talk about sustainability, because that's not the language the public is using, and that's not the language that the media is using. So rather than trying to force that language down their throats, and they won't publish it, how can we use language that middle fill-in-the-blank country, in my case, middle America, is using? And in the States, the United States, most people are using on average of 1,000 words, maybe 1,200 words. They're not using a lot of words. So how do we talk about food? How do we talk about water? How do we talk about energy with language that they're using? And then maybe at the end of an article that we're writing, maybe we touch on briefly Sustainable Development Goals so that people know there's a global effort around this kind of stuff. But I never lead with it. And I don't think you should lead with it either. Lead with language and concepts that people are using. So if we want to talk about flint and lead and water, build that out slowly but surely to talk about a water problem in the United States more generally. And there are plenty of examples, unfortunately. New Jersey lead, Ohio lead, California drought. Then maybe we talk about a global water problem. Then maybe we talk about this body at the UN that's working on sustainable management of water, etc. Got a question. How do we use, I'm going to bring it up here, how do we use communications to bring more people together on something like climate change, a science-based issue that has been politicized? How do we use communications to bring more people together on something like climate change, a science-based issue that has been politicized? So I'll give a couple examples. So in Congress, where I used to work, in US Congress, you had Republicans then who would admit behind closed doors that yes, climate change is real, it's happening, but they can't talk about it publicly. You would also have Republicans get on board legislation that would encourage the federal government to be more responsive to extreme weather. And it was called the Prepare Act, and you had Republicans wanting the government to be better prepared to deal with extreme weather. In that legislation, never was mentioned climate change, the words climate change, but they knew full well that climate change was creating more extreme weather, and that extreme weather was doing damage to American coastal communities, and that the government needed to be better prepared. Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Sandy, the list goes on. So here are Republicans getting on board a preparedness approach so that the government is better prepared to deal with extreme weather, but they weren't willing to name climate change for a variety of reasons. Koch funding is a good example of why they were probably quiet on the science and naming climate change explicitly in the legislation. Are we willing as communicators to move progress forward, move legislation forward, move law forward, move bills forward that help prepare us to deal with extreme weather and extreme weather events, even if they don't mention climate change? I think we're going to have to be creative in pivoting off moments that most of society recognizes as problematic. Extreme weather is probably one of the best ones, and raise up the specter of that and how we need to prevent and mitigate for that without always mentioning climate change. Because, and my PhD was in climate change, so I care about this issue a great deal, but I think we have to be creative about finding other ways to talk about it. Again, the economic and health arguments are so clear here. So how do we talk about air pollution when 3 million people around the world are dying from air pollution? Do people care about that? Yes, they care about that. Do we need to talk about climate change in that same sentence? Probably not. So how do we move real work forward without always using language that either has a lot of stigma around it, that's been politicized in the US context heavily and elsewhere, and actually move good work forward without being attached to certain narratives or memes or frameworks that maybe come with a lot of baggage, unfortunately, but that's the reality we're dealing with. As you think of more questions, please ask, and I'm just going to keep talking with tips and techniques that I think are useful or hopefully will be useful for you. Now, in the event that you don't have a lot of money or any money for ads, unfortunately, as you pick up any paper or go to any online outlet, you will see ads controlling the conversation, and increasingly companies are buying stories. So stories are often bought by companies, or there's a quid pro quo, a full page ad guarantees a story. You don't have any money to engage the conversation. What can you do for free? Earned media, it's called. So let's say you've got a report or a conference or something interesting you can do press work off of. That's one approach, but I'm going to go to something freer and something I've built my voice around, I've built my life around. So when I moved to DC, I realized quickly, Washington, DC, that if you're not a Bush or a Clinton, and if you didn't go to an Ivy League school, which I didn't, how do you build a name for yourself in a town where money talks? And for me, I found it in free media. And by that, I mean, I just put my voice out there. Granted, I had traveled a lot, and I was traveling a lot. I was going to countries that were relevant to Washington, D.C. foreign policy, like Yemen, like Somalia, like Pakistan, like Afghanistan, so that I had something valuable to add to the conversation. But I was writing lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots, truly, lots and lots of what are called op-eds, and they're opposite the editorials. So if you pick up a traditional newspaper, and I could show you the New York Times, the editorial is on one side, and your opinion piece, which is opposite the editorials, on the other side. That's free. That's up to you to write 700 words. Granted, you've got to be tracking news. And if you're not reading news day to day to day, you're probably not going to be able to get published, because you bet those editors who would review your work, they're reading the news every single day. So remember, I talked about moment. We've got a small window to weigh in on a certain issue. If you miss that moment, you've lost your opportunity. So you've got to be tracking the news, and you've got to be willing to write quickly. What's great about these op-eds is that it's a great analytical exercise, problem-solving exercise, like how would we solve this issue? So do it for your work as a messenger to improve your messaging. So it's a great exercise just analytically as a problem solver, but then get the word out. It's free. And if your op-ed runs, it reaches thousands of people, maybe tens of thousands of people, maybe hundreds of thousands of people. But as you write your op-ed, and I'm happy to send out a media training manual that I wrote a couple of years ago for the Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflict. You can actually find it on my website, which is just my name, michaelshank.com. I have it under publications. You can find it there, but I'm happy to send it out after. In an op-ed, this is all you need. It's pretty simple. And if you're writing about the SDGs or sustainable development and you want me to look at an outline for an op-ed, feel free to shoot me an email, michael.shank@unstsn.org, michael.shank@unstsn.org. I'm happy to look at your outline. And this is all your outline needs to be, 5 sentences. A main argument. It's got to be clear and it's got to be opinionated. A lot of you doing the good work in peace building or conflict prevention or sustainable development understand rightly that the work is nuanced and it's complex and it's difficult, but in an opinion piece, you've got to simplify it to one very clear main argument. It's got to be in the first paragraph, because imagine an editor is reviewing hundreds and hundreds of op-eds a day. I'm not kidding. And they're skimming your piece. They're not going to read it thoroughly. They're not going to look for complexity. They're not going to look for nuance. They're skimming your piece, and you need to show in the first paragraph a very clear main argument. 1. And then the next 3 sentences that you would send me, be like, hey, Michael, how does this look? The next 3 sentences should be supporting statements or supporting points, backing up that main argument. So your main argument could be, we shouldn't bomb this country. Here are 3 reasons why we shouldn't bomb this country. And then what editors will want, because they don't want you to be anti-only, they want you to be solutionary in your writing. So it's a new word, you don't have to use it. Pivot to policy prescription recommendations. Well, if we shouldn't bomb this country, and here are 3 reasons why we shouldn't bomb this country, what should we do? And so that simple outline, 5 sentences, 5 bullet points, you could send me and say, hey, Michael, does this look right? How does this sound? Sometimes people do apples and oranges in the supporting points, but you don't want to do that. You want to make it very clear, very succinct, all the same type. We shouldn't bomb Syria for this reason. We shouldn't bomb Syria for this reason. And we shouldn't bomb Syria for this reason. But what we should do is this, just as an example. So in free earned media, if you don't have money for advertising and you don't have a report or a publication to pitch to press, that is a way to get the word out. I highly encourage you to do that. We need more people weighing in, because if you're not weighing in, who's going to be weighing in? People that we're trying to change, the minds we're trying to change, and the money that we're trying to undercut with the free earned media. We've got another question. Can you talk about shock messages versus adaptation messages and storytelling in general concerning climate change? Can you talk about shock messages versus adaptation messages? So if I think I understand your question, I'm gonna interpret it, and if I miss it, just ask another question. But I would never, if you can, I would never use the word adaptation or even mitigation. There's language, there's jargon that we use all the time in the sustainable development field that just, again, the media isn't using. They're not using heavily adaptation or, again, sustainable development. Now, they may talk about, hey, is this sustainable? Can we sustain this? Somebody asked me over at Columbia when I was giving a talk on media, they were like, can we talk about complexity? Because they were engaged in conflict complexity. They love the word complexity. And I said, no, please don't ever use the word complexity in dealing with the press. Now, does the public understand difficult? Is this difficult? Is it complex? Yeah, they might use that language, but they're not going to use the word complexity. So adaptation is the same thing. Now, could we talk about adapting to a new reality given climate change? Yeah, so adapting, how do we adapt? The public might use that. Adaptation, less so. Now, in terms of shock messages, should we and do we engage the very negative narratives that are often used? And I'll give one example where I don't like to use the word in my press work or in my op-eds, terrorist, because I think a terrorist in our day and age is only dealt with by killing that person or by locking them up forever. And frankly, I don't think that's an efficient use of funds, going back to the economic message, and I don't think it's helpful to society if we can't ever reintegrate them because it's so expensive to keep them behind bars, and killing them, frankly, undercuts potential positive, productive contributor to society. So in using the negative shock messaging of terrorist, which a lot of people do because it's how they think they can enter the conversation. Oh, I'll talk about the terrorists, they're the bad guys, we've got to kill them, got to bomb them, that kind of thing. In an effort to be a part of the conversation, you're actually reaffirming and reifying the very negative narratives that are propagating the work you're trying to change. So if I want the US to bomb less in foreign policy, if I keep using terrorist because I want to be a part of the conversation, I'm actually supporting US foreign policy because I'm holding up the very frames, the shock messages, the narratives that are allowing that foreign policy to exist, because nobody wants terrorists stateside, nobody wants terrorists, period. But how do we talk about actors who are using violence or actors who are engaged in extremist thinking, period, whether it's in the US? There was a piece in New York Times today that talked about white militias in Kansas who were spewing all kinds of hate and vitriol towards Somali immigrants there. And I found it interesting that the New York Times, and this is classic New York Times, this is classic US media, period, has no problem talking about white militias. We'd never call them terrorists. Or any of the white actors who have done violence in the United States, we'd never call them terrorists. But switch up the identity of that person, switch up the religion of that person, and now we call them terrorists, doing the same action in the same state in the United States of America. And we're reifying those negative narratives that are supporting our US foreign policy and our homeland security, et cetera. So maybe hopefully that answered your questions, but I think in shock messaging, we have to be very careful about the narratives we use because we might be supporting the very policy that we're trying to change. Other questions that you might have? I'll just keep talking. So one thing I haven't dealt with, if you've got a report or a publication that you want to put out, how do you do it? So a lot of people tend to write really long press releases. Don't ever do that. Reporters aren't really reading press releases anymore. A buddy of mine at Bloomberg News, Eric Roston, told me that, yeah, he rarely reads press releases and his colleagues rarely read press releases. So a lot of time is spent on press releases, long press releases, like we're gonna host this conference. And FYI, conferences are rarely press-worthy. A lot of people think they are, and in our field, sustainable development field, SDG field, we love conferences. I can't tell you how many conferences we host here and host elsewhere, and people think it's press-worthy. It's usually not. So unfortunately, conferences are usually not press-worthy. But if they have the potential to be press-worthy, we have to be willing, and I'm just gonna self-disclose as to some of our planning around a conference we're doing at COP22, which is coming up. We're hosting a low emissions solutions conference. And if you go to lowemissions.solutions, you'll find out more. But in the planning for that, in the planning for press outreach on that, several people in the organizing committee were suggesting narratives that I had heard pre-Paris. The business should invest in this, and policies should set parameters for business. And it was the same language I had heard pre-Paris, and the old tired language that reporters, I felt, would not track or be interested in. So we don't need more narratives about business need to invest in sustainable development and policy needs to set the parameters, blah, 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 blah. None of that, in my mind, was going to fly with press. What was potentially going to fly with press and work with press is that this was the first big technical solutions focused event around COP, where real solutions would be tested, tried, scaled up, rolled out. So I thought, okay, that might be our angle, and we'll see. We're starting to do press outreach. We'll see if it works. But we have to constantly be creative in thinking about, all right, what narrative hasn't been tried in the press? What narrative is old and tired? And I felt the business invest policy parameter thing was old and tired and it wouldn't work. And that the solutions approach might work because post-Paris, after the promises and the pledges and the commitments of 80 by 50 and 100% renewable energy and all that kind of stuff, that now reporters wanted to see real solutions on the ground. What's being tested, what's being tried. And I think that's where most reporters are at based on my conversations with them. They want to see what's working, what's not working, tell us about it, share the process. And while on that, I deal with a lot of people who want to deliver a final product. Here, press, dun, 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 here's our final product. Here's our 80 by 50, 80% greenhouse gas emissions reduction by 2050. Here's our 100% renewable energy. Here's our final product. Doesn't look great. Doesn't it look great? A lot of cities, a lot of governors, a lot of UN officials want to deliver a final product that's polished. I would beg to differ that press often want to know about the process. What's working, what's not working. And that's tough for officials. That's tough for city officials. That's tough for governors. It's tough for ambassadors to say, you know, we actually don't fully know how to get to 80 by 50. We're trying these things out. Reporter X, Y, or Z, why don't you come with us? Why don't you figure it out with us? Why don't we test some ideas out? That's interesting to a reporter, not a final polished product. And here, now, in a monologue way, tell this story for us. Bring the reporter in the process because they're interested in that as well. Looks like we've got another question. Many media channels discuss sustainable development with opinions. Position. Sorry, I'll repeat out the question as I say it. Many media channels discuss sustainable development with opinions or a position. Got it. Shouldn't the media be impartial? Great question. Shouldn't the media be impartial, deliver factual information only, and allow people to formulate their own opinions based on facts? Wow. Bless you, because I totally agree. The media should be impartial, should deliver factual information only, and should allow people to formulate their own opinions based on facts. Many media channels do, as you note, deliver opinion and position. In fact, you're starting to see reporters who used to only do impartial fact move into opinion writing. Even the New York Times, the top outlets, are writing with opinion as reporters. And increasingly, I mentioned a quid pro quo that you'll see a full page ad and then a story related to that full page ad. That's a quid pro quo. That's an arrangement made with the paper that if we take out this full page ad, we'll get a favorable story on that issue. Washington Post used to do it all the time. I would see a full page ad on a Maryland casino that was going up, and then an article about how great that casino is going to be and the jobs it will bring the community. Now, you're starting to see more and more contractors or freelancers write for outlets, and they're often professors. And so in the New York Times, what will appear as what you think is an article written by a reporter, it's actually written by a professor or a nonprofit. So increasingly, you're seeing opinion. Now, where I think reporters should report the facts, they used to report a 50-50, the verdict's out on climate, for example. So we'd have the climate deniers pitted against the climate scientists in a 50%, 50%. We're giving both sides of the debate, which, you know, when you've got 98% of scientists saying, no, the verdict is not out, we know exactly what's happening. Reporters are increasingly only siding with climate science, which is what they should do. I've had several examples of CNN wanting to pit a climate denier against a climate scientist, and they would call me and say, do you have a climate scientist? And of course I did. I had several, Heidi Cullen and Catherine Hayhoe, incredible communicators on climate science. If you don't know their work, you should, they're great. But they didn't want to be in a space where what message was being sent by CNN is that the verdict is still out. We've got climate deniers Who knows if climate change is really happening, pitted against climate scientists. Broadcast media tends to do that more than print media or online media, but it still happens, and that's a problem. And so if you see outlets doing that, pitting that 50-50 verdict still out, not sure really what the story is, challenge your outlet. Be like, I'm sorry, the science is clear. Most of the large majority, only a slim 2%, watch John Oliver's take on that, only a slim percentage think the science is still debatable. It's not. And so challenge your media outlet. Be like, hey, really report the facts here. So anytime you see that partiality come in, do challenge your outlet. You need to hold them accountable. Let's see, do we have any more questions? And I hope you're inspired at this moment and not overwhelmed, because there are a lot of opportunities here. I hope you're inspired to think about writing. If you've not written, start small, and you can start small with a letter to the editor, an LTE. So if, let's say you see an article that you either vehemently agree with or vehemently disagree with, write in. And most newspapers and sometimes online outlets will accept a letter to the editor. A letter to the editor should follow the same formula I recommended for an op-ed, but they're just shorter. They're 100 words, 150 words, 200 words. Some outlets are bigger. USA Today, I think, can take up to 400 or 500 words if you're in the States, but check with your local outlet. They'll have parameters. And so take that exercise as a beginning step. If you've not written before, or if you're scared about writing, or if you don't want to write, try with a letter to the editor. It's easier to start that way. It's only 100 words, main argument, 2 or 3 supporting points to back up that main argument, and then a pivot to some kind of policy, prescription, or recommendation. That begins you into the field. You'll start feeling more comfortable with that. And just like any other muscle, whether you're doing yoga or playing basketball, it becomes easier the more you do it. So I'd encourage you not to try once, get discouraged, and stop. Try once, get discouraged, and try again. Try twice, probably a little bit of discouragement, doesn't come out seamlessly or flawlessly, and do it again and again and again and again and again and again. I used to, when I started writing, 2006 is when I really started writing, I would set aside time, optimal prime time for me to write during the day, usually in the morning, because daylight helps. Got some daylight here, rather than in the evening when I'm tired, my eyes are tired, I'm not thinking clearly. Saturday mornings, 9 to 12, I would just write. I would say, okay, Michael, Saturday morning, this Saturday morning, you're gonna write. What are you gonna write about? I would do a little research, ruminate, marinate, check out some articles, so that by Saturday, I would have some idea of what I wanted to write, and I would plunk it out. That's what you need to do. Just like going to yoga, going to the gym, or however you do your exercise, you set aside time, and I'm gonna go from 5 to 6, I'm gonna go to yoga, and this is what I'm gonna do. Same with writing, from 5 to 6 today, and no one's gonna take that away from me. So you might have kids, you might have work obligations, but when you go to yoga, you usually don't leave halfway through because you have to do something else. You stay there for the whole time. Same with writing. You have to protect that space, write, and then you can edit later, but just get some stuff on the page. It's much easier if you just get some stuff on the page and go from there. Looks like we've got as much time as you want. No, I'm gonna wrap up, but I do want to leave you with this, that if you go to my website, michaelshank.com, and click under publications, scroll down to the media training manual, and I've got everything in there. Many, many pages of how to work with the press, how to write press releases, which we didn't get into this time, but I have it in my manual. Just quick note on that. Make sure you have all the juicy stuff in the first paragraph. Not unlike the op-ed, people are skimming. If they're reading press releases at all, they're skimming. So have all the good stuff, the who, what, when, where, and why in the first paragraph. But there's more there in the media training manual. Again, please reach out to me, michael.shank@unsdsn.org. If you've got questions, if you want to weigh in on the SDGs and sustainable development, I'm here to help and give some quick advice to you on that. Thank you for your time. Go out and change the world. We need your voice in the press, because again, if you're not there, someone's going to be there that might have moneyed interest and be against the very change that we want to see. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Good luck.